The testing facility on Kepler Station hummed with nervous energy as Dr. Vexhai adjusted the restraint field for the third time. The Zephyrian scientist's forearms moved in practiced coordination, his crystalline eyes reflecting the harsh white lights of Laboratory 7. Behind him, a collection of the galaxy's most respected xenobiologists, military strategists, and behavioral analysts watched through reinforced viewing panels. "Subject displays typical Deathworlder aggression patterns," announced Commander Tethver, his scaled hide rippling with barely contained excitement. The Draconian officer had fought in 17 different conflicts across the Outer Rim, but had never encountered a human in combat. "Note the elevated heart rate and the way she tracks movement even while restrained." The human female sat motionless in the center of the testing chamber, her dark hair falling across her shoulders in a way that seemed almost casual despite her circumstances. Sarah Chun had volunteered for this evaluation after her transport ship suffered engine failure near the station. What was supposed to be a simple rescue had turned into the opportunity of a lifetime for the scientific community. Earth was legendary throughout the galaxy, a death world so hostile that its inhabitants had evolved into something that defied conventional understanding of biological limits. The stories were almost mythical. Humans who could survive in environments that would kill most species within minutes. Beings who healed from injuries that would be permanently crippling to others. Creatures whose very psychology was built around persistence and adaptation in the face of impossible odds. "Begin Phase 1, Dr. Vexhai announced, his translator converting his rapid chittering into standard galactic. Physical stress tolerance assessment. The gravity in the chamber began to increase. One standard galactic unit became 2, then 3. Most species would be unconscious by now, their cardiovascular systems failing under the crushing weight. Sarah's breathing deepened slightly, but she remained upright, her brown eyes scanning the observation deck with what could only be described as curiosity. "Fascinating," whispered Dr. Yilmara, the Altarian psychologist leaning forward against the viewing panel. Her telepathic abilities, which could read the emotional states of most sentient beings across vast distances, detected something unexpected. "She's not afraid. There's wariness, yes, but underlying that is something else. Something I've never encountered before." The gravity continued to climb. 4 units, 5, 6, Sarah's jaw tightened, but she remained conscious. Her hands, while restrained, clenched into fists. The monitoring equipment showed elevated stress hormones, but also something else. Her body was actively adapting, her blood vessels constricting and expanding in patterns that shouldn't be possible. "Impossible," breathed Commander Tethver. "At 6 units, her bones should be fracturing. Her organs should be failing." Perhaps the legends are true," Dr. Vexhai murmured, making rapid notes on his datapad. "Deathworld evolution produces results that challenge our understanding of biological limits." Sarah's voice cut through the chamber's speakers, clear despite the crushing gravity. "Is this supposed to be difficult?" The question sent a ripple of unease through the observation deck. Dr. Yilmara's tentacles writhed in distress as she picked up something new from the human's emotional signature. What she had initially mistaken for wariness was actually restraint. The human was holding back. "Increase to 8 units, Commander Tethver ordered, his military training overriding his scientific caution. The gravity field intensified again. Equipment in the chamber groaned under the stress. Sarah's breathing became more labored, but she lifted her head to look directly at the observation deck. When she smiled, it wasn't the grimace of someone in pain. It was the expression of someone who was just getting started. "You know," she said conversationally, "this reminds me of basic training back home. Though we usually had to carry a full pack while running through this kind of gravity." Dr. Vexhai's 4 hands paused over his controls. "That's impossible. No species could function normally at 8 gravitational units?" "You might want to check your equipment," Sarah suggested. "Because this feels like a light workout compared to what I did yesterday morning." The silence in the observation deck was profound. Every species represented there had their own elite warriors, their own examples of physical peak performance. None of them could survive what the human was experiencing, let alone joke about it. Phase 2, Commander Tethver announced, his voice tight with disbelief. Temperature tolerance? The chamber's environmental controls activated, and the temperature began to drop rapidly. -10 degrees Celsius. -20. -30. Frost began forming on the walls of the chamber. Most species would be entering hypothermic shock. Sarah shivered once, then seemed to settle into herself. Her breathing became steady and controlled. You guys wouldn't happen to have a jacket, would you? It's getting a bit chilly in here. -40 degrees, Dr. Vexhai announced unnecessarily. His instruments were working perfectly. The human should be unconscious, her body shutting down to preserve core functions. Instead, she was complaining about being chilly. Let's try the other direction, Commander Tethver ordered. The temperature swung dramatically upward. 20 degrees, 40, 60, 80 degrees Celsius. The air in the chamber shimmered with heat distortion. Sarah's skin flushed red and sweat beaded on her forehead, but she remained alert and responsive. Now, this is more like summer back home, she commented. Though it's a bit dry. Could use some humidity. Dr. Yomara stumbled backward from the viewing panel, her telepathic senses overwhelmed. There's something wrong with my readings. The emotional patterns I'm detecting. They're not consistent with a being under extreme stress. It's as if she single quotes S... bored? Impossible, Commander Tethver repeated. But his conviction was wavering. Sarah looked up at the observation deck again. And this time her smile carried a hint of something that made every observer step back instinctively. It wasn't malice, exactly, but it was the expression of a predator that had been playing with its food and was beginning to lose interest. So far this has been interesting, she said, her voice carrying easily through the chamber's speakers. But I have to ask, when do we get to the actual testing? Because if this is what you consider extreme conditions, I'm starting to understand why humans have such a reputation in this part of the galaxy. The observation deck erupted in nervous chatter as scientists compared readings, and military officers questioned their assumptions about galactic power structures. Dr. Vexhai found himself staring at his instruments, trying to understand how everything he thought he knew about biological limits could be so fundamentally wrong. None of them yet realized that they weren't conducting a test of human capabilities. They were being evaluated by something far more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. The emergency meeting convened in Conference Room Alpha within an hour of the initial tests. Station Commander Zolfinus, a veteran hegemony officer, whose scarred carapace told stories of countless battles, paced the length of the oval table while various department heads presented their findings. The preliminary results are unprecedented, Dr. Vexhai reported, his forearms gesticulating rapidly as data streams scrolled across the central display. Subject endured gravitational forces that should have liquefied her skeletal structure. Temperature extremes that would flash freeze or cook most known biology, and atmospheric compositions that would be toxic to 97% of galactic species. And her response? Commander Zolfinus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Mild discomfort, Dr. Yomara interjected, her normally serene Altarian features twisted with confusion. My telepathic readings indicate she found the experience mildly amusing. There's no precedent for this in our psychological databases. Admiral Crethan, the station's military liaison, leaned back in his chair. The ancient Vorthan had lived through the Centauri wars and witnessed the rise and fall of 3 different galactic civilizations. His weathered features betrayed nothing of his inner thoughts. What are you all dancing around? Say it plainly. Dr. Vexhai's crystalline eyes dimmed slightly. The subject is operating at performance levels that exceed our instrument's ability to measure. We may have underestimated the evolutionary pressure of Deathworld environments by several orders of magnitude. Underestimated? Commander Zolfinus stopped pacing. Doctor, your report suggests that a single human could theoretically survive in environments where our best military equipment would fail. Are you telling me that Earth produces super soldiers as a matter of course? Not super soldiers, Dr. Yomara corrected quietly. That would imply artificial enhancement. This appears to be baseline human biology. A civilian volunteer who works in hydroponics maintenance on her home vessel. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Every military officer in the room was running the same calculations. If a maintenance worker could withstand conditions that would kill elite special forces from any other species, what would happen if they encountered actual human military personnel? "We need to continue the tests," Admiral Creathan announced finally. "Phase 3 involves combat simulations. I want to see how she responds to actual threat scenarios." "Admiral," Dr. Yomara protested, "my telepathic readings suggest there may be significant risk factors we haven't identified. The subject's emotional patterns are unlike anything in our databases. There's a controlled aggression there, but it's paired with something else. Something that feels like ... patience? Patience? As if she's waiting for something. Or evaluating something." Commander Zolthanis resumed his pacing. "Waiting for what?" "I don't know. But every instinct I possess as a telepath is warning me that we may be making a serious error in judgment." Admiral Creathan dismissed her concerns with a wave of his primary manipulator. "The Galactic Council has been pressuring us for actionable intelligence on human capabilities since first contact protocols were established. This is our opportunity to provide definitive data." 2 hours later, Sarah found herself in a much larger chamber equipped with advanced combat simulation systems. The restraints had been removed, and she was provided with standard galactic survival gear. Basic environmental suit, emergency rations, and primitive tools that might be found on any civilian vessel. The simulation began innocuously enough. She was presented with a series of puzzles that required quick thinking and adaptation, problem-solving scenarios that would challenge the most elite minds in the galaxy. Sarah completed them methodically, her approach revealing a cognitive flexibility that impressed even the hegemony's tactical analysts. "Note how she approaches each challenge," Commander Zolthanis observed from the control booth. "No hesitation. No apparent stress response. She evaluates, adapts, and executes with minimal effort." "It's almost mechanical," agreed Dr. Vexhai. "But there's creativity in her solutions. She's finding approaches our algorithms didn't anticipate." The challenges escalated. Combat drones entered the simulation chamber, programmed to test reflexes and combat instincts. They moved with lethal precision, armed with non-lethal but painful energy weapons, designed to incapacitate most species quickly. Sarah observed the drones for exactly 3.7 seconds before moving. What happened next would be analyzed and reanalyzed for decades to come. The human moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Not faster than the drones, but with a predictive ability that allowed her to be where they weren't. She turned their own momentum against them, using leverage and timing to disable advanced military hardware with nothing but primitive tools and her bare hands. "Impossible," breathed Commander Zolthanis. "Those drones are programmed with combat protocols from 17 different military traditions. They should be adapting to her responses." "They are adapting," Dr. Vexhai replied, his voice tight with disbelief. "She's adapting faster." Within 6 minutes, all 12 combat drones lay scattered across the simulation chamber, their systems disabled through what could only be described as surgical precision. Sarah stood in the center of the wreckage, breathing slightly harder than normal, but otherwise unaffected. "Is there going to be a second wave?" she asked the monitoring systems. "Because I'm just getting warmed up." The observation booth fell silent. Admiral Creathan leaned forward, his ancient eyes narrowing as he studied the human with new interest. "Release the hunters." "Admiral," Dr. Yomara protested, "the hunters are designed for actual combat scenarios. They're programmed to kill," "which makes them a more realistic test," the Admiral replied coldly. "If humans are going to be integrated into galactic society, we need to understand their full capabilities." The hunters were the hegemony's answer to situations that required maximum lethality with minimal collateral damage. biomechanical constructs that combine the deadliest aspects of predator evolution from across the galaxy. They moved like liquid shadow and struck like lightning. 3 hunters materialized in the simulation chamber, their adaptive camouflage making them nearly invisible. Their targeting systems locked onto Sarah immediately, probability matrices calculating optimal strike patterns. Sarah tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something the observers couldn't hear. Then she smiled, and for the first time since the testing began, it reached her eyes. "Now we're talking," she said softly. Dr. Yomara gasped, her telepathic senses suddenly overwhelmed by what she was detecting from the human. The controlled aggression was still there, but it had been joined by something else, something primal and terrifying, that sent waves of instinctive fear through every observer in the control booth. The hunters attacked simultaneously, moving with coordinated precision that should have been impossible to counter. Sarah was no longer where they struck. She wasn't even where their predictive algorithms calculated she should be. She was behind them, moving with a deadly purpose that turned their own lethal capabilities into liabilities. "My God," whispered Dr. Vexhai. "She's not just surviving. She's hunting them." The first hunter went down in a shower of sparks, its neural matrix severed by a precise strike that Sarah delivered with nothing more than a piece of debris from the combat drones. The second lasted longer, its adaptive systems trying desperately to compensate for an opponent that fought with rules it couldn't understand. The third hunter managed to land a glancing blow across Sarah's shoulder. "Drawing blood?" She looked down at the wound with mild interest, then looked back at the biomechanical predator with an expression that made every observer step back from the viewing panels. "Mistake," she said simply. What followed was systematic destruction that redefined the word efficient. The hunter found itself dismantled piece by piece, its sophisticated systems turned against it by an opponent who seemed to understand its construction better than its own creators. When the silence finally fell, Sarah stood alone in the chamber, surrounded by the debris of the most advanced combat systems the hegemony could deploy. She looked up at the observation booth, and her smile contained something that made Admiral Crethan's blood run cold. "So," she said conversationally, "when do I get to meet the real threats?" The emergency council session that followed was unprecedented in Kepler Station's history. Representatives from 12 different species sat around the hexagonal conference table, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, telepathic static, and electronic translation matrices working overtime. Admiral Crethan stood at the head of the table, his ancient frame radiating authority that had been earned through centuries of military service. Behind him, holographic displays showed frame-by-frame analysis of Sarah's combat performance, each replay more disturbing than the last. "The implications are clear," announced Dr. Thelvox, the hegemony's chief xenobiologist. His tentacled head swayed as he spoke, bioluminescent patches pulsing with agitation. "If this represents baseline human capability, we must fundamentally reassess every assumption about Deathworld evolution." "Baseline?" interrupted Commander Valkaris, her insectoid features clicking with disbelief. The subject destroyed 3 hunters with improvised weapons and sustained minimal injury. "Our elite special forces require heavy weapons and armor to accomplish similar results." Senator Quilmoran, representing the diplomatic corps, leaned forward on his hover platform. The energy being's form flickered with anxiety. "Has anyone considered that we may be misunderstanding the nature of the test? Perhaps the human believes this is an evaluation of our capabilities rather than hers." The observation sent an uncomfortable silence through the chamber. Dr. Yomara, who had been unusually quiet since the combat trials, finally spoke. "My telepathic readings support that theory. Throughout the entire process, I've detected curiosity, mild amusement, and something that could be described as professional assessment. She's been studying us. Studying us how?" Admiral Crethan demanded. "Our reactions, our technology, our capabilities. From a tactical perspective, she's learned more about hegemony military systems in 6 hours than most species discover in years of formal intelligence gathering. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every representative was running the same calculations, reaching the same terrifying conclusion. If humans possessed this level of capability as individuals, what kind of threat did they represent as a species? "We need to understand her limitations," Admiral Cretan announced. "Continue the testing, but escalate to scenarios that will push her beyond current parameters." "Admiral," Dr. Yilmaro protested, "I strongly advise against further escalation. My telepathic readings indicate we're approaching a threshold of some kind. The human's emotional patterns are shifting. Shifting how? She's becoming less patient." Meanwhile, in her temporary quarters, Sarah Chun sat cross-legged on the simple bunk, reviewing everything she had observed during the day's activities. The room was Spartan by human standards, but luxurious compared to the emergency shelters she had known growing up on Luna Colony, her neural implant. Invisible to the station's scanners due to its organic integration, compiled data with quiet efficiency. Gravitational field generators, atmospheric manipulation systems, energy weapons, biomechanical constructs, telepathic beings, adaptive AI systems. Every system she had encountered was now mapped and analyzed. Their strengths and weaknesses catalogued with military precision. The door chimed softly, and Dr. Vexhai entered carrying a tray of what he assumed was human-compatible nutrition. His forearms moved with careful precision, betraying the nervousness that his scientific curiosity couldn't quite mask. "I hope the accommodations are satisfactory," he said, setting the tray on the small table. "Our understanding of human nutritional requirements is still limited." Sarah examined the offered food with genuine interest. Protein synthesis that resembled chicken, carbohydrate matrices that might pass for vegetables, and a liquid that was probably meant to be water. It was actually well thought out, considering they were working from theoretical knowledge. "It's perfect," she said, taking a bite. "Better than military rations, honestly. You've put a lot of effort into this." Dr. Vexhai's crystalline eyes brightened with pleasure. "You are quite different from what our databases suggested. More thoughtful, more civilized than expected." Sarah paused in her eating, considering the comment. "What did your databases suggest?" "Aggressive, primitive, driven by emotion and instinct rather than rational thought. The reports from the Outer Rim describe humans as barely controlled savages who solve problems through violence." "Interesting," Sarah replied, her tone neutral. "And based on today's tests, what's your current assessment?" Dr. Vexhai settled into the chamber's other chair, his forearms folding in a gesture that suggested deep thought. "Honestly, I'm more confused than before. Your performance suggests capabilities that shouldn't be possible, but your behavior indicates intelligence and restraint that contradicts every previous report." Sarah smiled, and for a moment Dr. Vexhai caught a glimpse of something that made his scientific curiosity spike with alarm. "Maybe the problem is with the reports." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. When do you encounter humans on the Outer Rim? In what circumstances?" Dr. Vexhai considered the question. "Conflict zones, border disputes, piracy incidents, emergency rescues." "Exactly. You've been meeting humans who are either in combat situations, emergency scenarios, or dealing with criminals. That's like judging your entire species based solely on interactions with your military during wartime." The observation was so obvious that Dr. Vexhai felt foolish for not considering it earlier. "You're suggesting that our understanding of human psychology is based on statistically irrelevant samples." "I'm suggesting that you've been seeing humans at their most dangerous and assuming that's their default state." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression becoming more serious. "It's an understandable mistake, but it's led to some concerning misconceptions, such as—" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "Dr. Vexhai, in the past 6 hours, I've been subjected to gravitational forces, temperature extremes, atmospheric toxins, and armed combat scenarios that were clearly designed to test my limits. From a human perspective, this would be considered hostile action." The Zephyrian scientist went very still. "You consider our tests to be attacks?" I consider them to be preliminary evaluation of my capabilities before something more serious begins. Sarah's tone remained conversational, but something in her eyes had changed. The question I've been asking myself is whether this represents scientific curiosity or threat assessment. Scientific curiosity, Dr. Vexhai replied quickly. Absolutely scientific curiosity. Sarah nodded slowly. I hope so. Because if this were a threat assessment, it would suggest that someone is planning something that would require detailed knowledge of human capabilities. And that would be problematic. Problematic how? Sarah stood up, moving to the small viewport that looked out into the station's central hub. Dozens of different species moved about their daily routines, unaware of the conversation taking place just a few meters away. Doctor, how many humans have you actually met? You're the first. And based on your tests today, how would you rate my capabilities compared to your military's elite forces? Dr. Vexhai hesitated. Superior. Significantly superior? I'm a maintenance engineer, Sarah said quietly. I fix water recycling systems and calibrate atmospheric processors. Before today, the most dangerous thing I'd ever fought was a malfunctioning hydroponics unit. The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Vexhai felt his understanding of the universe tilt on its axis. If this was what a civilian human could accomplish, what were their actual warriors capable of? Doctor, Sarah continued, still looking out at the station's inhabitants, I need you to understand something important. Humans don't start fights, but we do finish them. And if someone is evaluating our capabilities because they're considering us a threat to be eliminated, she turned back to face him. And Dr. Vexhai saw something in her expression that made him understand why the Outer Rim reports describe humans as terrifying, that someone is about to learn the difference between testing a human and threatening one. The door chimed again, interrupting the conversation. Commander Zolthanus entered without waiting for permission, his scarred carapace gleaming under the chamber's lights. Behind him, 2 armed guards took positions by the door. Miss Chun, the commander said formally, Admiral Creathan requests your presence in the main laboratory. We're ready to proceed with Phase 4? Sarah looked at Dr. Vexhai, whose forearms were trembling slightly with what might have been fear or excitement. Then she looked back at Commander Zolthanus, and her smile contained something that made the veteran officer step backward. Phase 4? She asked pleasantly. How exciting. I was just telling Dr. Vexhai that I was wondering when we'd get to the real testing. Phase 4 took place in the station's primary combat training facility, a massive chamber designed to simulate any environment the hegemony military might encounter. As Sarah entered, she noted the increased security presence and the way various species representatives positioned themselves behind reinforced barriers that hadn't been present during previous tests. Admiral Creathan stood at the primary observation deck, his ancient features set in an expression of grim determination. Beside him, holographic displays showed tactical readouts and threat assessment, matrices that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of human capabilities. Miss Chun, the Admiral announced, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. Previous phases have focused on individual capability assessment. Phase 4 will evaluate your responses to strategic scenarios and team-based conflict situations. Sarah walked to the center of the vast chamber, her movements casual but precise. She had noted 17 different weapon systems, 23 sensor arrays, and at least 40 concealed defensive positions within the facility's architecture. Her neural implant quietly cataloged each one while maintaining its undetectable operational status. Team-based scenarios? She asked, looking up at the observation deck. Does that mean I'll be working with allies or against teams? Both, Admiral Creathan replied. Initial scenarios will place you in command of simulated units engaged in tactical operations. Later scenarios will test your responses to coordinated opposition. The chamber's environmental systems activated, transforming the sterile metal walls into a holographic representation of an asteroid mining facility. Emergency klaxons wailed as simulated gravity fluctuations and atmospheric Breaches created a crisis scenario that would challenge the most experienced disaster response teams. Scenario 1, announced the testing AI. Critical infrastructure failure with civilian casualties. You have command of a 12-unit rescue team with mixed species capabilities. Minimize casualties and restore facility operations. Sarah studied the scenario for exactly 4 seconds, then began issuing orders to her simulated team. Her commands were precise, efficient, and demonstrated an understanding of multi-species physiology and psychology that impressed even the xenobiologists in the observation booth. Note how she assigns tasks, Dr. Vexhai observed. She's maximizing each species' natural advantages while compensating for their limitations. The Aquarians are handling atmospheric breaches, the terraformers are managing structural integrity, and the Zephyrians are coordinating communication. More importantly, added Commander Zolthanus, she's achieving casualty minimization rates that exceed our best recorded performances. Her tactical efficiency is remarkable. Within 18 minutes, the crisis scenario was resolved with 0 casualties and full facility restoration. Sarah stood in the center of the holographic wreckage, hands on her hips, looking up at the observation deck with an expression that suggested mild disappointment. "Is that it?" she asked. "Because that was basically standard emergency response protocol. We practice scenarios like that monthly on civilian vessels." Admiral Creathan exchanged glances with his staff officers. The scenario she had just completed was based on an actual disaster that had claimed hundreds of lives when the hegemony's best response teams attempted it. Scenario 2, the AI announced, hostile boarding action. Defend critical systems against coordinated assault by enemy forces. The environment shifted again, becoming the interior of a military vessel under attack. This time, Sarah was given command of a mixed military unit defending against numerically superior attackers with advanced weapons and tactical support. What followed redefined the observer's understanding of strategic thinking. Sarah didn't just defend the critical systems. She turned the ship itself into a weapon, using the attacker's own momentum and superior numbers against them. She isolated enemy units using atmospheric controls, redirected their communications through ship systems that gave her intelligence on their plans, and coordinated her defenders in ways that made every enemy advantage become a liability. "Impossible," breathed Commander Valkaris. "She's not just winning, she's making it look easy." "Note the casualties," Dr. Yomara added, her telepathic senses focused on the tactical display. 0 defensive losses. She's neutralizing the enemy without losing a single defender. Admiral Creathan leaned forward, studying the tactical readouts with the focused intensity of someone who had commanded fleets in actual combat. She's not fighting them. She's dissecting them. The scenario concluded in 22 minutes with complete tactical victory. Every enemy unit neutralized, all critical systems defended, and the defending force at full strength. Sarah looked up at the observation deck again, and this time her expression carried a hint of something that made several observers step back from their viewing stations. Scenario 3, the AI announced, its vocal patterns carrying what might have been reluctance. Solo infiltration and elimination. Neutralize high-value targets in heavily defended position. The environment became an enemy fortress bristling with automated defenses, patrol units, and surveillance systems that would challenge the galaxy's most elite special forces. Sarah was given basic equipment and tasked with penetrating to the facility's core to eliminate 3 targets without triggering general alarms. She disappeared into the holographic environment like smoke. "Where is she?" Commander Zolthanus demanded, studying displays that showed no trace of the human. "Thermal sensors show nothing," reported Dr. Vexhai. "Motion detectors are negative. It's as if she simply vanished." "Impossible," Admiral Creathan stated. "The surveillance grid covers every approach vector." Dr. Yomara suddenly gasped, her telepathic senses detecting something that shouldn't be possible. "She's not avoiding the sensors. She's moving through areas where the sensors don't expect anything to be." "Explain." "Ventilation systems, power conduits, structural gaps." She's treating the facility like a three-dimensional puzzle and moving through spaces that the defensive grid assumes are inaccessible. On the tactical display, enemy units began disappearing one by one. Not destroyed, but systematically disabled in ways that prevented them from communicating their status. Sarah was moving through the facility like a force of nature, invisible and inexorable. First target eliminated, the AI announced. No alarms triggered. How? Commander Zothanis demanded. She used the target's own security system against him, Dr. Vexai reported, reviewing the sensor logs. Somehow convinced the automated defenses that the target was an intruder. Second target eliminated, no alarms triggered. She's not just infiltrating, Admiral Creathan realized with growing unease. She's taking control of their systems from the inside. Third target eliminated, mission complete. Total time, 37 minutes. Casualty assessment, 0 defensive losses, minimal enemy casualties. Sarah reappeared in the center of the chamber as the holographic environment faded, looking exactly as she had when the scenario began. No signs of stress, no indication that she had just accomplished something that should have been impossible. Interesting exercise, she commented, though the defensive AI was a bit predictable. It relied too heavily on preset patterns instead of adaptive responses. The observation deck had gone completely silent. Every military officer present was running calculations that produced results they didn't want to believe. Every scientist was questioning fundamental assumptions about biological limitations and tactical possibility. Admiral Creathan activated his personal communicator. All stations, this is Admiral Creathan. Initiate Security Protocol 7. I want full background intelligence on human military capabilities immediately. Sarah heard the order clearly, and her expression shifted into something that made every observer suddenly understand why the Outer Rim reports described humans as terrifying. It wasn't anger exactly. It was the look of someone who had been patient for a very long time and was beginning to consider other options. Admiral, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, before you make any decisions based on these tests, there's something important you should understand about humans. Which is? Sarah looked around the facility, taking note of the increased security presence, the armed guards, and the way various species were positioning themselves as if preparing for conflict. You've been testing me under the assumption that I represent some kind of threat. And I've been cooperating because I thought this was scientific curiosity. Her smile contained something that made Admiral Creathan's centuries of combat experience scream warnings. But if you're planning to treat humans as enemies based on these results, you should know that everything I've shown you so far has been me trying very hard not to hurt anyone. The silence that followed was absolute. Because, Admiral, Sarah continued conversationally, if you want to see what a real threat looks like, all you have to do is keep treating me like one. The emergency session that convened 30 minutes later included representatives from the highest levels of Hegemony Command. Fleet Admiral Xanthuk attended via quantum communication link from the capital world, his massive form filling the holographic projection system. Around the table, department heads and military advisors shared data streams in hushed tones, their various forms of communication creating an undercurrent of nervous tension. Admiral Creathan stood before the assembled group, his ancient features grave with the weight of his report. Behind him, tactical displays showed combat analysis that challenged fundamental assumptions about galactic power balance. The situation is unprecedented, he began. Single human civilian has demonstrated capabilities that exceed our elite military units across every measurable parameter. Physical resilience, tactical intelligence, strategic thinking, adaptive capability, and combat effectiveness all register beyond our current classification systems. Fleet Admiral Xanthuk's image flickered as quantum fluctuations interfered with the transmission. When it stabilized, his massive head was tilted in an expression that suggested deep concern. Your report indicates that this represents baseline human capability? Affirmative. The subject identifies herself as civilian maintenance personnel with no military training or enhancement. Impossible, declared General Mordock, the hegemony's chief military strategist. No species achieves that level of capability through natural evolution alone. Dr. Yomara, who had been monitoring the human's emotional patterns throughout the day, spoke quietly. There's another factor we haven't adequately considered. The subject's psychological profile suggests she's been evaluating us as much as we've been evaluating her. Evaluating us how? Fleet Admiral Xanthuk demanded. Our capabilities, our weaknesses, our response patterns. From a human perspective, what we've conducted isn't a scientific study. It's a hostile interrogation followed by threat assessment protocols. The implications sent a wave of unease through the assembled officers. If the human had been treating their tests as intelligence gathering rather than scientific cooperation, she now possessed detailed knowledge of hegemony military systems and tactical doctrines. Recommend immediate containment, General Mordock announced. Transfer the subject to maximum security facility for further evaluation under controlled conditions. General, Dr. Yomara interjected. My telepathic readings indicate that would be catastrophic error. The subject's psychological profile suggests she's currently operating under self-imposed restraints. If she perceives herself as a prisoner rather than a voluntary participant, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we've been testing a human who's been trying very hard not to hurt anyone. If we change that dynamic, we may discover capabilities that we're not prepared to handle. Admiral Creathan activated the chamber's main display, showing real-time feeds from the human's quarters. Sarah sat calmly on her bunk, apparently reading from a datapad. Her posture was relaxed, but something about her stillness suggested the coiled potential of a predator waiting for the right moment to move. The subject requested access to our general database 30 minutes ago, Admiral Creathan reported. Standard diplomatic protocol granted the request. She's been reviewing historical files on galactic conflicts, military doctrine, and species capabilities. Learning about us, Fleet Admiral Xanthuk observed grimly. All confirming what she already suspected, Dr. Yomara corrected. My telepathic readings suggest she's been analyzing our capabilities throughout the entire testing process. The database review is confirmation rather than discovery. General Mordock leaned forward, his scaled features reflecting the harsh illumination of the conference chamber. What does that mean for our strategic position? It means, Dr. Yomara said slowly, that a single human now possesses more actionable intelligence on hegemony military capabilities than most of our own officers. The silence that followed was profound. Every officer present understood the implications. Military doctrine, technological capabilities, tactical weaknesses, strategic resources, all assessed by an intelligence that had demonstrated analytical capabilities that exceeded their best systems. There's more, Admiral Creathan continued. During the database review, the subject accessed files on human contact incidents. Her reactions to those files were ... significant. The main display shifted to show psychological monitoring data. Emotional patterns that had remained stable throughout hours of extreme testing showed dramatic spikes when reviewing specific historical records. What triggered the response? Fleet Admiral Xanthuk asked. Files documenting first contact protocols with isolated human settlements. Specifically, incidents where hegemony forces classified human responses as hostile and responded with military action. Dr. Yomara's tentacles writhed with agitation. The emotional patterns match what my species would experience when learning about attacks on their own people. She's not viewing these as historical incidents. She's viewing them as ongoing threats to her species. How many such incidents? General Mordock demanded. 17 documented first contact scenarios over the past decade. 12 resulted in military action due to human aggressive response to hegemony presence. And the human perspective on these incidents? Admiral Creathan manipulated the display controls, bringing up tactical analysis that painted a very different picture of historical events. From human perspective, armed alien vessels appeared near their settlements without warning, conducted unauthorized scans of their facilities and personnel, and responded to requests for identification with threats and ultimatums. The revelation sent a chill through the conference chamber. What hegemony records classified as first contact with hostile primitives looked very different when viewed through the lens of human tactical capability. "My God," whispered Dr. Vexhai, his forearms trembling as he processed the implications. "If the settlers we encountered possessed even a fraction of this subject's capabilities, then we've been systematically attacking people who were trying not to hurt us." Admiral Creathan finished grimly. Fleet Admiral Xanthuk's image flickered again, his massive form leaning forward as if trying to reach through the quantum link. "What is the subject's current status?" "Unknown. She finished reviewing the historical files 20 minutes ago and hasn't moved since. My telepathic readings suggest she single quotes dunking. About what?" Dr. Yomara was quiet for a long moment, her telepathic senses focused on the distant human with growing alarm. "About whether we're the kind of species that can be reasoned with, or the kind that only understands force." General Mordock activated his tactical display, showing defensive positions throughout the station. "Immediate containment. Full military response. We cannot allow this intelligence to reach other humans." "General," Dr. Yomara said urgently, "you don't understand. Containment isn't possible. The subject's technical capabilities mean she has access to every system on this station. Communications, navigation, life support, defensive systems. If she decides we're a threat to her species, she do what? She demonstrate the difference between a human who's trying not to hurt anyone and a human who isn't." As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's voice came through the station's communication system. Not from her quarters, but from the central command systems that should have been completely isolated from guest access. "Admiral Creathan," her voice was calm, conversational, but carried an undertone that made every officer in the chamber step back from the conference table. "I've finished reviewing your files on human contact incidents. I think we need to have a conversation." The security alerts that followed confirmed Dr. Yomara's warnings. Sarah wasn't just accessing the communication system. She was inside every critical system on the station, moving through their most secure networks like they were open directories. "How?" General Mordock demanded. "She's not hacking our systems," Admiral Creathan realized with growing horror. "She's thinking faster than our security protocols can adapt. Every defensive measure we have is built on assumptions about cognitive processing speed and technical knowledge that she exceeds by orders of magnitude." Sarah's voice came through the speakers again, and this time there was something in her tone that made every survival instinct in the room scream warnings. "Admiral, I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to give you exactly one chance to reclassify those historical incidents as the tragic misunderstandings they were. Issue formal apologies to the affected human settlements, and establish proper diplomatic contact protocols." "And if we refuse?" Fleet Admiral Xanthuk asked. Sarah's laugh was soft, almost musical, but it contained something that made ancient warriors like Admiral Creathan recognize the sound of approaching death. "Admiral, you've spent the day testing what a human can do when she's trying very hard not to hurt anyone. If you refuse my offer, you're going to learn what happens when that stops being a priority." The lights in the conference chamber dimmed for exactly 3 seconds, then returned to normal. Every officer present understood the message. She wasn't just in their systems. She was in complete control of them. "You have 6 hours to decide," Sarah announced pleasantly. "I'll be in my quarters." The 6 hours that followed would later be remembered as the longest in Kepler Station's history. Throughout the massive facility, beings from dozens of different worlds went about their daily routines. Unaware that their leaders were engaged in the most critical decision the hegemony had faced in centuries. In Conference Room Alpha, the emergency session had expanded to include every department head and senior officer on the station. Holographic displays showed tactical readouts, diplomatic protocols, and psychological profiles, while quantum communication links connected them to the highest levels of hegemony command across the galaxy. Fleet Admiral Xanthuk's massive form dominated the central display, his ancient features carved with the weight of command decisions that had shaped galactic civilization. Around him, the shadowy figures of the High Council deliberated in voices too low for the quantum transmitters to carry. Clearly, status report, the fleet admiral demanded. Admiral Creathan stood before the assembly, his scarred carapace reflecting the chamber's harsh lighting. The human has maintained her position in guest quarters for the past 5 hours and 37 minutes. She appears to be reading our historical archives with particular attention to military doctrine and species development patterns. Appears to be? Our monitoring systems register her presence, but her actual activities are difficult to track. She's accessing our database through pathways that bypass normal security protocols. General Mordok's scaled features twisted with frustration. How is that possible? Our security systems are designed to prevent exactly this kind of intrusion. Dr. Yomara, whose telepathic abilities had become crucial to understanding their situation, spoke quietly. She's not breaking our security. She's thinking around it. Our systems are designed to stop conventional attempts at unauthorized access. They can't compensate for an intelligence that approaches problems from directions we haven't anticipated. What's her current psychological state? Fleet Admiral Xanthuk asked, calm, patient, focused. Dr. Yomara paused, her tentacles writhing with nervousness. But there's something else underneath. Something that feels like preparation. Preparation for what? I don't know. But every instinct I possess is warning me that we're approaching a critical threshold. Dr. Vexhai, who had been quietly analyzing data streams throughout the session, suddenly straightened in his chair. Admirals, I've been reviewing the human's database access patterns. She's not randomly browsing our archives. She's building something. Building what? A comprehensive analysis of hegemony capabilities, deployment patterns, strategic resources, and logistical networks. If she were military intelligence, this would represent the most complete assessment of our strategic position ever compiled by a foreign power. The implications sent a chill through the assembled officers. In 6 hours, a single human had gained access to information that enemy civilizations had spent decades trying to acquire. There's more, Dr. Vexhai continued. She's cross-referencing our historical records with communication intercepts from human territories. She's not just learning about us. She's comparing our capabilities to something else. Human military capabilities? Unknown. But the pattern suggests she's making strategic calculations that assume conflict. Fleet Admiral Xanthuk leaned forward, his massive head filling the display. Recommendations? General Mordok activated his tactical station. Military response. Full containment. We cannot allow this intelligence to leave the station. That assumes containment is possible, Dr. Yil_Mara interjected. My telepathic readings suggest the human has been aware of our deliberations from the beginning. She's not acting like someone who's trapped. She's acting like someone who's chosen to wait. Wait for what? For us to make a decision that reveals our true intentions. Admiral Creathan manipulated his data displays, bringing up psychological profiles that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. There's another factor to consider. The human's emotional patterns suggest she views this situation as representative of broader hegemony policy toward her species. Meaning our decision here will determine whether humans classify the hegemony as a potential ally or a threat to be eliminated. The silence that followed was profound. Every officer present understood the implications of facing an entire species with capabilities like those they had witnessed. Suddenly, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Not security alerts, but communication intercepts from the station's long-range sensor arrays. Report, Fleet Admiral Xanthuk demanded. Commander Velkaris activated the main tactical display. We're receiving quantum communications from human territories. Multiple sources, high-priority encryption, all directed at coordinates that match this station's position. The human is communicating with her people? Negative. The communications are incoming, not outgoing? Someone in human space is trying to contact this station. Dr. Yomara gasped, her telepathic senses suddenly overwhelmed by something new. The human's emotional patterns just changed. She's relieved? No, that's not right. She's satisfied. Satisfied about what? As if something she's been waiting for has finally happened. Sarah's voice came through the station's communication systems, cutting through the conference chamber's tense atmosphere with casual precision. Admiral Creathan, you might want to answer those incoming communications. I believe my ship is wondering why I haven't checked in yet. The tactical displays exploded with new information as the station's sensors detected massive energy signatures approaching from hyperspace. Not one vessel, but an entire fleet materializing at the edge of the system. Impossible, breathed General Mordock. Our sensors show no sign of fleet movement from human territories. Because you were looking for ships like yours, Sarah's voice replied pleasantly. Human vessels don't move like anything in your databases. The main display showed long-range sensor readings that defied conventional understanding of space travel. The approaching vessels were moving at velocities that should have been impossible, using propulsion systems that operated on principles the hegemony's best scientists couldn't identify. Admiral, came a new voice through the communication system, speaking flawless galactic standard with an accent that was unmistakably human. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the UES Indomitable. We're here to pick up our engineer. I trust she's been treated well. Fleet Admiral Xanthok S. image flickered as quantum interference from the approaching fleet disrupted communications. How many ships? Tactical analysis indicates 47 vessels, Commander Velkaris reported, her voice tight with disbelief. But Admiral, they're not acting like military ships. No weapon signatures, no aggressive formations. They're positioned like an escort fleet. An escort fleet for what? Sarah answered the question. For me, Admiral. When a human engineer goes missing in alien space, people tend to get worried. Especially when her last transmission indicates she's being held for questioning by an unknown military force. The implications were staggering. An entire fleet deployed to retrieve a single maintenance engineer. The resources required for such an operation suggested either that humans valued their people beyond all rational calculation, or that Sarah-Chun was far more important than she had claimed. Admiral, Dr. Yilmara said urgently, the humans' emotional patterns suggest this isn't a rescue mission. It's a test. A test of what? Of whether we're the kind of species that returns their people peacefully or the kind that requires force. Captain Vasquez's voice came through the communication system again. Kepler Station, this is UES Indomitable requesting permission to dock. We're here to collect our engineer and discuss establishing formal diplomatic relations between our species. We hope this can be resolved peacefully. The unspoken threat was clear. The human fleet wasn't just offering diplomacy. They were providing a choice between negotiation and something much less pleasant. Sarah's voice added a final comment. That made every officer in the conference chamber understand the true nature of their situation. Admiral, for the past 6 hours, you've been testing what happens when you capture a human. Now you get to decide what happens when you give her back. The 47 human vessels waited at the edge of the system, their impossible engines silent but ready, while the most powerful military installation in this sector of the galaxy struggled with a decision that would determine the future of galactic civilization. The final hour arrived with a tension that seemed to permeate every bulkhead and corridor of Kepler Station. In Docking Bay 7, the largest facility capable of accommodating diplomatic vessels, Admiral Creathan stood alongside representatives from 12 different species as they waited for history to unfold. The UES Indomitable was unlike anything in hegemony databases. Where their ships were built for intimidation and raw power, the human vessel was a study in elegant efficiency. Its hull curved in ways that suggested both aesthetic beauty and functional perfection, while energy readings indicated propulsion and defensive systems that operated on principles their best scientists couldn't begin to understand. Captain Elena Vasquez emerged from the airlock wearing what appeared to be a standard, Diplomatic dress uniform? But Admiral Crethan's experienced eye noted details that suggested it was far more than ceremonial clothing. The fabric moved in ways that implied integrated defensive systems, and her casual stride carried the unconscious confidence of someone accustomed to operating in hostile environments. Behind her came a small delegation of humans, each representing different aspects of their civilization. Scientists, diplomats, military advisors, and cultural attaches, all carrying themselves with the same casual competence that had characterized Sarah's behavior throughout her stay. "Admiral Crethan," Captain Vasquez said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Thank you for hosting our engineer. I trust her stay has been educational for everyone involved." Admiral Crethan accepted the handshake, noting the careful precision of the captain's grip. Strong enough to be respectful, controlled enough to avoid injury, but with an underlying suggestion of capabilities held in reserve. "Educational is one word for it," he replied. "Your engineer has challenged many of our assumptions about human capabilities." "Sarah tends to have that effect on people," Captain Vasquez smiled. "She's always been good at problem-solving." Dr. Vexhai stepped forward, his forearms moving in the Zephyrian gesture of respectful inquiry. "Captain, if I may ask, your engineer's capabilities seem to exceed what our databases indicate about human baseline performance. Is she representative of typical human civilian personnel?" Captain Vasquez exchanged a glance with her science advisor, a tall woman whose augmented eyes suggested cybernetic enhancements that had integrated so completely they appeared entirely natural. "Dr. Vexhai, isn't it?" the captain replied. "You conducted the initial physical stress tests?" Sarah mentioned she enjoyed the gravity work. Sighed, it reminded her of basic conditioning exercises. "Basic conditioning?" "Standard physical fitness requirements for civilian space personnel. We operate in environments where equipment failure might require manual operation in extreme conditions. Our people train accordingly." The implication sent a wave of unease through the assembled hegemony representatives. If extreme physical capability was considered basic civilian preparation, what did human military training produce? "There's been a misunderstanding," Admiral Crethan announced formally. "The testing protocols applied to your engineer were based on incomplete information about human physiology and psychology." "We meant no disrespect." Captain Vasquez's expression remained pleasant, but something in her eyes shifted. "Admiral, Sarah shared her experiences with us during our approach. From her perspective, she was subjected to environmental extremes, forced combat scenarios, and psychological pressure designed to evaluate her responses to hostile action. The tests were scientific in nature." "I'm sure they were." "But from a human perspective, what you conducted was a comprehensive threat assessment. You evaluated her physical limits, combat capabilities, tactical thinking, and strategic responses. That's not scientific curiosity. That's military intelligence gathering." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Every species present was running the same calculations, reaching the same uncomfortable conclusion about how their actions must have appeared to human observers. Dr. Yomara stepped forward, her telepathic abilities focused on the human delegation. "Captain, what does this mean for relations between our species?" "That depends," Captain Vasquez replied, "on whether this represents hegemony standard procedure for first contact with unknown species, or whether it was a unique response to humans specifically." Admiral Crethan felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like a gravitational field. "Captain, I will be honest with you. The hegemony's previous encounters with humans have been limited to conflict situations in contested territories. Our assessment protocols were based on incomplete data and flawed assumptions." "Flawed how?" "We assumed that humans encountered in combat zones represented typical examples of your species' capabilities and psychology. We now understand that we were evaluating your people under extreme stress conditions and mistaking emergency responses for normal behavior." Captain Vasquez nodded slowly. "That explains the hostile first contact protocols documented in your historical files. You were meeting humans who were already in combat mode and assuming that was their default state." "Exactly. which led to response patterns that escalated rather than de-escalated tensions. And now? Admiral Creathan activated his personal communicator, connecting to the hegemony's highest command levels. Fleet Admiral Xanthok, this is Admiral Creathan. I'm recommending immediate revision of first contact protocols with human settlements. Previous incidents should be reclassified as tragic misunderstandings based on insufficient intelligence. Fleet Admiral Xanthok's voice came through clearly. Agreed. Formal apologies will be issued within 6 hours, and diplomatic contact will be established with affected settlements. Captain Vasquez's smile became genuinely warm for the first time since her arrival. That's a good start, Admiral. But there's something else we need to discuss. Which is? The 47 ships waiting at the edge of your system aren't just here for Sarah. They're here because human space has been watching the hegemony for quite some time, trying to determine what kind of neighbors you might be. The revelation sent shock waves through the assembled representatives. The hegemony's intelligence services had detected no indication of human observation or surveillance. For how long? General Mordek demanded. Since your first documented contact with human settlements, Captain Vasquez replied matter-of-factly. When armed alien vessels appear near human territory and respond to requests for identification with threats, people tend to pay attention. Dr. Vexhi's crystalline eyes dimmed with realization. You've been studying us. Of course. Wouldn't you? Admiral Creathan found himself reviewing decades of hegemony operations from an entirely new perspective. What conclusions have you reached? Captain Vasquez was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. The hegemony is a complex civilization with tremendous diversity of thought and culture. Most of your species seem to be decent people trying to build something positive in a difficult galaxy. But your military doctrine is built around assumptions about force projection and intimidation that work well against species with limited capabilities. And against species with unlimited capabilities? That's what we're here to find out, Captain Vasquez replied. Sarah's experience suggests that individual hegemony personnel are capable of learning and adapting when presented with new information. Whether that's true at the institutional level remains to be seen. Sarah Chun appeared in the docking bay's main entrance, carrying a small bag and looking exactly as she had when she first arrived. Behind her, Dr. Vexhi and several other researchers followed with expressions of barely contained scientific excitement. Sarah, Captain Vasquez called out. How was your stay? Educational, Sarah replied, echoing Admiral Creathan's earlier assessment. I learned a lot about hegemony technology and psychology. They learned a lot about human adaptability and patience. And your evaluation? Sarah looked around the assembled representatives, her expression thoughtful. They're good people who made bad assumptions based on incomplete information. Given accurate data and time to process it, they appear capable of making rational decisions. Captain Vasquez turned back to Admiral Cree_Yan. Admiral, the human delegation is prepared to open formal diplomatic relations with the hegemony. We're offering technology exchange, cultural cooperation, and mutual defense agreements. In exchange for? Revised first contact protocols, formal apologies for previous incidents, and a commitment to peaceful resolution of territorial disputes. Admiral Creathan considered the offer. Given what he had learned about human capabilities, it was remarkably generous. Almost suspiciously so. Captain, your terms seem quite favorable considering your obvious strategic advantages. Captain Vasquez's laugh was warm and genuine. Admiral, humans don't want to conquer the galaxy. We want to explore it, learn from it, and maybe find some friends along the way. But we also want to make sure that anyone who mistakes our peaceful intentions for weakness understands their error before it becomes fatal. She gestured toward the viewing ports, where the human fleet waited in perfect formation. Those ships out there? They're not a threat unless you make them one. But if you do, we'll demonstrate the difference between humans who want to be friends and humans who don't, Sarah finished quietly.